The awakened shadow. The shadow moved, its form shifting and curling like smoke, yet dense and solid in the same breath. Grace's heart raced as she took a cautious step backward, her gaze never leaving the dark mass before her. The air buzzed with unnatural energy, making her skin prickle and her muscles tense. Each breath felt heavier, as if the atmosphere around her was thickening, trapping her in place. Her mind raced, 1,000 thoughts flickering through her consciousness, but one stood out: survive. She squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of the entity's shape, but it had none. It was formless, ever-changing, like a living shadow detached from the world around it. Only its eyes remained constant, 2 pinpricks of red that seemed to pierce through her very soul. Then it spoke again, the sound echoing through her bones. The shadow.
"You have no place here, mortal."
The words were drawn out, dripping with an eerie calm that sent chills racing down her spine. Grace instinctively took another step back, her fingers twitching toward her sword. But something held her back, something primal and deep, a warning carved into the very core of her being.
Grace's thoughts. What is this thing? No, it's not just a creature. It's something else. Something that shouldn't exist in this realm. She straightened, forcing her voice not to waver as she addressed it. "Grace, I'm not here to disturb you. I'm looking for someone." The entity paused, its gaze narrowing slightly, as if considering her words. Silence stretched between them, the weight of it crushing. Then, slowly, it began to drift forward, each movement a rippling of darkness. The shadow.
"Many come seeking, few leave."
The statement hung in the air, an ominous promise that tightened the knot of fear in Grace's chest. She swallowed hard, glancing once more at her sword, lying just a few steps away. She had to get to it, unarmed. She stood no chance against something like this. But if she made a sudden move, it would see her as a threat. Grace's thoughts. Calm, slow, show no fear. Keeping her gaze locked with the creatures, she inched sideways, edging closer to where her weapon lay. The shadow's eyes followed her every move, its presence growing colder, darker, as if it were feeding off her tension. Sweat trickled down her spine, but she kept her expression neutral. Then it surged. The shadow exploded forward, a wave of darkness swallowing the ground between them. Grace lunged for her sword, fingers grazing the hilt just as the creature's tendrils lashed out. She rolled to the side, the blade slipping into her grip as she came up in a defensive stance. The shadow recoiled, the air crackling with its rage. The shadow.
"You dare."
Its voice boomed, shaking the earth beneath her feet. Grace gritted her teeth, raising her sword. "Grace, stay back." The creature paused, its form twisting violently. For a moment, Grace thought she saw something within it, an image, a flash of another place, another time. But it was gone before she could make sense of it. The shadow shifted, circling her slowly, its gaze never leaving her blade. The shadow.
"That weapon."
Grace's grip tightened. Did it recognize the sword? There was no time to ponder. The creature lunged again, faster this time, a blur of darkness and claws. Grace swung her sword in a wide arc, the blade humming with energy. It connected, a burst of light searing through the creature's form. The shadow screamed, a sound that tore through her mind, nearly dropping her to her knees. But it wasn't done. The shadow's form split, 2 tendrils darting out to ensnare her legs. She slashed at them, severing one, but the second wrapped around her ankle, yanking her off her feet. Grace hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs as the creature loomed over her, its eyes burning with malice. The shadow.
"You cannot win. Surrender."
Its words were laced with power, pressing down on her like a physical force. Grace struggled, raising her sword, but the creature's grip tightened. Darkness crept up her legs, icy and suffocating. Panic flared in her chest. "No, not like this. Grace, I will not." A sudden explosion of light cut her off. The shadow recoiled with a shriek, the tendril holding her snapping back as the air filled with a brilliant, golden glow. Grace blinked, shielding her eyes as a figure stepped forward from the edge of the clearing.
Arianus, his armor shone with ethereal light, casting long shadows across the ground. The blade in his hand blazed with power, illuminating the darkness that seemed to writhe away from him. He looked fierce, his expression hard as he faced a creature that had nearly overpowered her. Arianus, leave her alone, fiend. The shadow hissed, its form flickering, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it seemed to grow, spreading out until it loomed above them both, an enormous, pulsing mass of rage and hunger. The shadow,
Two. To be devoured.
Arianus didn't flinch, his gaze steady. He stepped forward, his sword raised. Grace, get up. She forced herself to move, adrenaline surging through her veins. Pushing to her feet, she stood beside him, her own blade glowing faintly in response to his. The creature shifted, sensing the change.
What is this thing?
An echo, he murmured, eyes never leaving the shadow. A remnant of something far older than us.
And how do we fight it? He glanced at her, a brief smile breaking through his stern expression.
With everything we have. And then the shadow lunged, a massive wave of darkness crashing down on them both. They moved in unison, blades flashing as they carved through the seething mass. The clearing erupted into chaos, light clashing with shadow, each strike sending tremors through the ground. But for every piece they severed, the shadow reformed, stronger, darker. It roared, its voice reverberating through the air, a sound that promised pain and destruction. Grace's arms burned, her movements slowing as exhaustion set in. They couldn't keep this up.
Arianus, we're not winning. He gritted his teeth, his face pale with strain.
Arianus, then we hold it back until we find a way. But even as he spoke, the shadow surged again, overwhelming them. Grace stumbled, her blade slipping as the darkness closed in. Despair clawed at her. Was this it? Was this how it ended? Just then, a piercing light erupted from somewhere behind them, a blinding flash that tore through the shadow, ripping it apart. The creature screamed, its form unraveling as the light burned through its core. Grace turned, eyes widening in shock. A portal had opened at the edge of the clearing, its surface shimmering with radiant energy. And standing before it was a figure cloaked in white, a staff of pure crystal held aloft. The shadow recoiled, hissing in fury. The shadow.
No, you cannot.
But the light intensified, and with a final, ear-splitting shriek, the shadow was torn apart, its form dissolving into nothingness. Silence fell, the clearing bathed in the soft glow of the portal's light. Grace staggered, breathing hard, as the figure stepped forward, lowering the staff. Arianus moved to her side, his gaze wary. Arianus, who are you? The figure paused, then lowered their hood, revealing a face neither of them recognized. The stranger.
A friend, if you'll let me be.
And before Grace could respond, the portal behind them shimmered, twisting. Something else was coming through. The air crackled with energy, and the portal pulsed violently. Grace and Arianus braced themselves as another figure began to emerge, a presence that felt both familiar and terrifying. What had they just unleashed?
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the content, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll always know when the next video drops. There's a lot more exciting stuff coming your way, so stay tuned and join the journey. Thanks for watching and for being a part of this novel gallery.